Hey guys, it's Courtney with the Kitchen Garten, and today we're going to be making a bread machine honey whole wheat bread. Now, you don't have to have a bread machine to make this particular loaf. I'm going to show you how I use my bread machine for part of it, or how I can use it for all of it, or if you don't have a bread machine, you can use your hands or a mixer if you happen to have a stand mixer with a dough hook. So let's get started. Okay, so before we start making the recipe itself, let me talk about the tools that I'm going to be using. So I've already milled my flour, so I'm going to make this loaf 100% whole wheat. That's the way that I like to make it. You can certainly use other proportions of all-purpose flour, but I do love 100% whole wheat loaf. It's not dense like so many store-bought wheat loaves will turn out to be. This is not a heavy bread. It's what my kids refer to, or my youngest refers to as the soft bread. Are you making the soft bread? Because I also like to make sourdough, and that can, have that crust on it. And so this is a traditional like soft sandwich bread. So I used my whisper mill to make my flour. So it's already been ground and it's waiting. Since this recipe calls for about 4.5 cups of milled flour, I milled about 3.5 cups of actual grain. So that's one thing. The second is the bread machine that I'm using. So this is the pan for my bread machine. And this is my machine. It's the Zojirushi. This thing is about 12 years old. And it's the, the BB CEC20. So they probably have a much newer one now. But this one has been really great. I've had zero problems with it or the whisper mill. This is actually a wonder mill because they don't make this anymore. They call it the whisper mill now, but it's the same thing. But this has to be 20 years old. I purchased it secondhand from someone. So if you buy appliances in the kitchen that hold up, then you don't have to, you're investing in your kitchen and you don't have to replace them as often. So that's a good thing. So those are the tools that I'm going to be using. So let's talk about what you're going to need for this particular recipe. Okay, so for this recipe, we're going to use freshly milled wheat. If you got access to it, that'd be great. We're going to use an egg. We've got about 1.5 cups of water. We are going to be using some good quality olive oil, honey, of course, because it's a honey whole wheat bread machine bread. And then we're going to be using yeast and salt. So it's really a basic bread. So all the ingredients you probably have on hand in order to make this loaf at home. So with a bread machine, you probably, if you have one, then your machine came with instructions, and usually it tells you the order in which you should place your ingredients. Okay, most bread machines that I've ever seen, and this is only my second machine, so both machines that I've owned normally tell you to put your liquids in first. So in this case, that's going to be our water, our egg, our olive oil, and our honey. And then you put in your dry ingredients, starting with flour, and then your salt, and then finally the yeast and a little well on the top. And so I'll show you guys what that looks like here in just a second. So pretty basic ingredients. This is derived off of a recipe that I got years ago from the Bread Beckers, which I'll link them below. I love all of their, well, I have one of their cookbooks, but I love Sue Becker's podcast. It's super great, especially if you're just getting into milling wheat at home or milling whole grains at home. What are the benefits of those, and why should you even consider it for your family? Isn't this just like an extra step that's not necessary? It's not true. So if you mill this fresh, you're going to be getting so many vitamins and minerals from it, including the vitamin E, vitamin K. So you're going to be getting a ton of nutritional goodness for your family, other than the fiber that everybody thinks about with whole grains. So there's a lot of testimonies on her podcast about ailments that people have been able to kind of step away from, thinking like warts and things like that, from just a regular consumption of freshly milled flour. So just something for you to consider. Okay, so let's get started. So you got your bread machine waiting over there. You got your empty pan. So this is a large bread machine. This makes about a 2.5 pound loaf, which is a big old loaf of bread. So you can see how deep this is. It's going to rise above this if I let it bake in the bread machine, which you totally can. Okay. Today, instead of baking it all the way through, I'm actually going to stop it after the first rise and pull it out and make 2 smaller loaves. So this recipe is really enough for 2 smaller loaves of bread. And when I say smaller, I mean probably regular size since this is so large. But it's totally possible just to pop it in your machine, let it ride. Okay. If you don't have a machine, just follow these basic instructions. Instead of putting your ingredients into your bread machine, container, or your pan, you're going to be putting it into a bowl, such as that, on a stand mixer or something like this, and mixing it until it comes off the sides and kneading it, letting it rise in a warm place, that kind of thing. So it's a totally versatile recipe if you just want a good honey whole wheat bread. So we're going to get started on this bread, and the first thing that you want to make sure is that your paddles are in place, because I have been there before where my paddles were not in place, and I didn't discover that until the cycle was done, and then I had nothing. I had some dried out ingredients, so fantastic. So make sure your paddles are in place. You're going to take your 1.5 cups of water, and I want it a little bit warm, so warm it up just a touch. Okay. Now in the original recipe that I used from the bread bakers from years ago, they called for a soy lecithin to be added to the dry ingredients, and it wasn't super easy to access here, and so I just use an egg. It's got a natural source of lecithin in it, so we're gonna add that in. Okay. At this point, you can grab a little fork, and you can mix it up a little bit. We'll give it a shot. Alright, so egg is mixed, and then we are going to take that measuring cup we had used for the water, and I love this one that's angled because you can measure your liquids from the top and still see. You don't have to get down next to it, so I love this. So I always do the oil first. It doesn't really matter what order, but if I go ahead and measure out the oil, then the honey comes out easier because the oil kind of coated the measuring cup. Alright, so we are going to go with a 1/3 cup of good quality. I would use either olive or avocado. Those would be my recommendations. I would not use, like a cooking oil like canola or something like this. I think we're finding more and more out about, seed oils, and even, I know they say even some of the olive oil is hard. It's so hard to know, right? So we just make the best choices that we can. So I would use either olive or avocado. I want to say I have used coconut before, and if you don't want to use an oil at all, melt some butter, melt a 1/3 cup of butter and put it in there, and that will be some really good tasting bread. So there's an option there. Alright, so next is going to be your honey. If I'm pouring big amounts like this, I just get out the big jugs that I use to fill up my smaller containers. This is a gallberry honey, which has a very distinct flavor, and I really love it. This is from where my parents live down in Florida, so this is Thomas Honey, and they got this for me, which is such a great gift. It's absolutely delicious, but use the honey that you like. The flavor will come through a bit, so if you don't like certain flavors of honey, like wildflower, orange blossom, whatever, make sure you just keep on hand the one that you do like. And maybe you didn't know that different honeys have different tastes, so it's true, so maybe try something a little different next time. So I'm going to put in a 1/4 cup of honey. Right about there. And bonus, you can wipe off the edge and just get a little sample. Alright, perfect. Okay. So we've got that going in. You don't want to waste it. Usually have a kid around who's willing to lick the spoon at this point. Olive oil does not bother them. All right, very good. All right, so that's all your liquids. You've gotten your water, you got your egg, you have your olive oil, and now your honey. So those are all your liquids taken care of. And so now comes your flour and your other dry ingredients. Always tap it a little bit. Okay, got your 1 cup measure, and I really should level them off. Okay, I'm just going to shake, and let's start adding. You can really see all the flecks from the whole grain being milled up in here. It's really quite beautiful, and you know you're getting the good stuff. All right, so first cup in, about 4.5. I just shake it to kind of top it off and get it to settle down in the measuring cup as well. I know that the best way to measure for baking is weight, but so many of us are just so dependent on, you know, the measuring by volume that, you know, we're making it work. So about 4.5 cups. So I've added in the last of my flour, okay, and then comes 2 teaspoons of salt, and it's going to go around the edge, okay, and then we are going to add the yeast. So I just buy one of the blocks of yeast and fill up this jar from 2017, and I keep the extra yeast that's not in the jar, because once you open the block up, it's loose yeast. I just keep it in a container in the freezer, and then I refill this jar as needed. So let me show you what it looks like to make this little well. Okay, so at the top, we're making a little indentation here, and this is just so our yeast isn't gonna get mixed too soon. Okay. 1, 2, 3, because we need a tablespoon. 3 teaspoons makes 1 tablespoon. Okay, so once your ingredients are all in, then it goes into the bread machine. Like I said, for today, instead of making 1 large loaf, I'm going to be making 2 smaller loaves. So I'm just going to run it through the mixing, the kneading, and then 1 rise. Also known as a dough cycle. Now, you can absolutely just set it to bake bread, boom and done. So we'll check back in about 1 hour and 12 minutes whenever it's done, and I'll show you how to form 2 loaves of bread. Or if this is all you needed, then you can check the recipe below and the links below. As for like where I get my grain, I order all of this in bulk from Azure Standard. I also have a link for where you can check out and look into a whisper mill for milling at home, and then also the Zojiruji bread machine, which is fantastic. You can do so many things with it. Sourdough, you can make jam in there, you can bake cake in it. So it does a whole lot. I find it to be very useful. So, all right, we'll check back in just over 1 hour. All right, guys, it's been 1 hour and 15 minutes. That's for the mixing, the kneading, and then the rising, and now it's ready. All right, also gonna prep dinner. So you'll see it's got a nice dome to it. So if I was going to leave it in the bread machine, it would go through, it would almost like beat it down again, that's a technical term, knead it again, and then there'd be a second rise. That's right. This was just taking it through a first rise. And actually you can set your machine to do whatever you like. So if you only want 1 rise on your bread and you want to bake it from here, because it's really quite nice, you can see it pops back. When it's touched, you can totally do that. All right, now at this point, I'm just going to put a little flour down. I did not seal my wood countertops with like polyurethane or anything like that. so I could use them for like this. So I'm just going to punch the dough down and then going to pull it out. If you got any kind of aggression, you know, tension, could be good. All right, and make sure I clean out around those paddles because lo and behold, there's always something there. All right. Okay, so you can use a dough cutter, and I'm just going to split it in half because again, I'm going to make 2 rolls out of this. This honey wheat into 2. I've got my 2 bread pans already oiled up, okay, because you don't want to spend all this time on bread and have it stick, okay? All right, so we're going to I'm going to stretch it out a little bit, okay, and essentially going to make kind of a roll with it. Now, this is the same dough that I'll use for a multitude of things. I'll make hamburger buns, hot dog buns, dinner rolls, anything like that. So honestly, if you're making this recipe, this bread machine, honey wheat, and you don't want to take it all the way through the bake cycle, you want to stop it after the first rise, you can use one for a loaf of bread and you can use the other for dinner rolls that night or whatever you need, okay? Sometimes I'll even take this and roll it out and fill it up with cinnamon, a little brown sugar and raisins, and roll it and make cinnamon raisin bread. So one loaf will be cinnamon raisin and one loaf will be just a plain honey whole wheat. So I am just going to kind of roll it up here just because I like that general shape. And I'm going to take, okay, actually let me do this again. I don't want to overwork it, but I do want it to be in a long shape to go inside my pans. And this is going to go through a second rise, so kind of tuck to the ends, and then if there was any kind of a seam at the bottom where you rolled it, you want to really just pinch that up. Okay. Let's set that down in there. I think I definitely got this. This one's a little bigger than that one. That's okay. Alright, so I just like to spread it out, knead with my fingers a little bit, and then roll it up. Pinch, 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 pinch. Tuck those ends. Smooth it out a little bit. It feels so good. It's not sticky at all. So really a lightly floured surface is all you need. Put it in here. Now, you can proof this. I usually proof it for about, or let it rise for about 30 minutes, and at the 30-minute mark, I'll go ahead and turn my oven on. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put it, I like to put them in my microwave because my light is on, and so that makes the microwave just naturally warm. So we're going to put it in there. So I had shoulder surgery, it's a little. We're going to put it in there and let it rise for 30 minutes. And I'll go ahead and clean up. So we'll check back. All right, guys, so it's really only been about 30 minutes. The bread rising and my oven is just about preheated to 375, so you can see the nice dome. Isn't it amazing how much bigger it got from? Now just be wary of over rising. I just mentioned that from personal experience. When I have used this to make like cinnamon raisin bread, I let it get too high and I was like, oh, look how pretty it is. And then when you go to cut into it, you've got gaping holes. So you don't want that. So we're just going to slide it in the oven, 20 to 30 minutes. Just keep your eye on it. I set my oven at 375, but gauge your oven. If it tends to run a little hotter, maybe bump it down to 350, and then let's keep our eyes on it. Okay. All right, here we go. All right, so it's time to take the bread out of the oven. It's been about 25 minutes. There's loaf 1 and loaf 2. So you see how they make 2 good-sized loaves, even though that was 1 loaf in the large Zojirushi bread machine. So we're going to give it a few minutes to cool, and then we'll turn it out and slice one just so we can check on the inside. Okay, so I took the bread out of their pans after about 5 minutes. The reason that you might leave your bread in the pan for a few minutes after it comes out of the oven is it allows your bread to sweat a little bit, which makes it easier to loosen up and pop out of the pan. So if you've ever wondered why you let it cool in the pan for a few minutes, that's why. So we're going to take one of these loaves, we're going to cut it open just to make sure that hopefully I didn't let it rise too much. It's still quite soft. Oh yeah. Look at that. Beautiful loaf of honey wheat bread. Okay. Smells delicious. Just so happen to have some good Irish butter. We'll slather it on. Yeah. Now if you like, that's rude. If you like for your bread to have like a firmer crust, you can certainly leave it in for an extra 5 minutes. I typically like my bread super soft, so I lean toward the lesser baked side. But you can certainly leave it in longer per preference. But this is just a great solid recipe for honey whole wheat bread for the bread machine, or you can start it in there and pull it out, or make it by hand. It's totally up to you. So hope you guys enjoy it, and you'll make some bread soon. It's so much better than store-bought.